Going back on this one issue, the way that the influence is being pushed through the corporations, we at our firm know that there are there's a couple of handfuls of corporations that each have more than $1 billion in capital that they're trying to get back from China. And they've been unable to get a dime out of China since November of 2016, when China closed its capital account completely. When you were in the administration, did you interface with any of these companies that were going through a lot of, pardon the pun, red tape, trying to get their money out of China?
Listen, the very first thing.
Did they come appeal to you?
Yeah, I think this will be a big shocker to people. Remember, when Trump won in a complete, upset that nobody saw coming, and particularly you have this post-war, liberal, democratic, rules-based order, okay? The Chinese have done nothing but game the system from day one on every set of rules. The rules are what they determine they are, okay? And nobody calls them on it because everybody thinks they're too weak. And so in the corporations, I think until
the corporation's afraid to call them on it?
Absolutely.
Because they know if they say 100%. That we can't get our money out, they shut their business off?
Shut down.
There's a quid pro quo?
Shut down. They absolutely fear it. Look at when they came back on this whole, by the way, on the entire situation with the tariffs, and tariffs are just not about tariffs and not about protectionism. That's why Trump's done it at such a scale. Remember, before Trump got here, people were talking about $25, $30 billion of tariffs. It was like, oh my God, that's so huge. Trump's program is $500 billion in tariffs, right, to tariff goods, because he knows the Chinese can't respond.
Correct.
And here's why they can't respond. People in the United States have to understand one thing. The Chinese look at us as a tributary state to them, and let me explain that. China's been around for 4,000 years, right? They've had good runs and they've had bad runs, okay? But one thing they know, and the reason they're still organized as a nation over 4,000 years, right? They know how to handle allies and they know how to handle bad guys, okay? Now what they've done is they got this system called barbarian management, and they know how to manage barbarians. The way they manage the barbarians is they take the leaders of the barbarians and they give them a taste of the good life. And you're going to be something special. You're going to get a special deal. Now, what happens back into the tributary state is whatever happens, that's your problem. Right. Okay? So you're going to, in the United States, what they have done for 25 and 30 years is played as a barbarian state, barbarian management. Okay? They incentivize our elites, and our elites deindustrialize, particularly the upper Midwest of this country. It's the reason Donald Trump's president. Your audience should understand one thing that's important is that, J.D. Vance, the great guy from Yale who wrote Hillbilly Elegies, is the best sociological study of the Trump voter. And it was J.D. Vance who told me, he says, hey, those studies that come out of MIT and Harvard show that there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China, the jobs that left with them, and the opioid crisis. Because this is not about tariffs. It's
actually logic.
It's not about tariffs. What this is about is human dignity and self-worth. Those factories went, Wall Street made the money, the corporations benefit from it for lower costs, and devil catch the hindmost on the workers. And so this is what Trump is kind of totally reversed. Now, what China sees us as is we're a tributary state. We send them natural resources, soybeans, beef, cattle, Boeing Airlines and Apple products. Oh, excuse me. We don't send Boeing Airlines and Apple products. You know why? Because they forced Boeing to do a joint venture and they forced Apple to make the products over there. So we're Jamestown to their Great Britain. Okay, and that's why the tariffs at the scale that Trump put them up at, they can't respond to. Okay?
Well, what's interesting is let's assume we put 25% on $520 billion. We're literally talking about a little over $100 billion.
Yes.
And I know that's a lot of money.
Yes.
But our economy is $19 trillion.
Yes.
It's still not that functionally meaningful to us, in my opinion.
Yes.
But I do think it's a leveling of a field, to your point.
It's converging.
They've been fighting a trade war with us since 2001, and we just haven't fought back.
Okay. The average compounded growth of the United States of America from 1946, the end of World War II, to 2000 was 3.5%. Okay? It's the reason we became a superpower. That economic engine that was unlocked and grew every year at 3.5% through good times and bad, on average.
Yep.
Since China joined the World Trade Organization, when they joined, they got most favored nation, the growth of the United States is 1.9%. Okay, 1.9%. And there's a lot of factors to that, but the central beating heart of it is China. That's because we deindustrialized. We sent our manufacturing over there. Yes, the tariffs in and of themselves, on a nominal number, an absolute number, are not huge. But when we look at the convergence of everything, what Trump has done is said, hey, we're at economic war. And we're going to hit back with everything. We're going to hit back with the 301s to stop the forced technology transfers. We're going to put these tariffs into the scale they've never seen before. We're going to have the ability, if we so desire, to liquidate companies like ZTE, to basically cut them off from their component parts in the West. They'll be out of business in 90 days. Also, the new things about investments, about these limitation in investments.
CFIUS reform.
The CFIUS reform that people are talking about. You bring all forces of government together on that and the stopping of intellectual property, you have something. What Trump has done, and this is why NAFTA was so important. You know, people mocked and ridiculed Trump. There's a book out called Fear that Gary Cohn, the president of Goldman Sachs, great Goldman Sachs, and I used to work there, he takes the documents off the president's desk. The book opens where he's taken the NAFTA deal, right, early on in the deal on Korea, he actually takes them off the desk because in his judgment, right, the president wasn't smart enough to understand what he was doing. Well, here's what Trump's done. The new NAFTA deal that he's created is basically setting up a geostrategic manufacturing base to counter East Asia, okay? And Japan is very quickly going to be part of that. A bilateral deal, not some TPP deal where we're just one among many. A direct bilateral deal with Japan as a partner. We've got one with Korea we're updating. And then the EU, Juncker has already told Trump, has already indicated that they're going to be a part of this too. What Donald Trump has done in less than 2 years against the second law of thermodynamics, right? The immutable law of the rise of China.
Right.
What he's done is reorient the entire world's supply chain away from China. And this is going to have economic growth opportunities that are going to be incredible. And he's done that kind of single-handedly against the fighting of the corporatist lobby, the fighting of the Wall Street Investor Relations Department, et cetera. So that's why I think it's really heroic.
It's that policy is one that it's interesting at the timing. If you look at just the let's say the economic laws of China were already slowing down before we decided to fight back. It just so happens to be that this pushback from a tariff, or whether the most elegant idea was the border adjustable tax, which was immediately killed by you and I both know who.
I love that one.
That was perfect in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But now,
by the way,
tariffs
audience,
are not perfect.
I am a huge believer that, and Paul Ryan and I have had our differences. When he first walked me through that, I said, that's the solution.
Exactly right.
That's the solution.
It's kind of an egalitarian way of going at it.
I think, and we all know why it got crushed.
Yeah.
I think that is something that should be brought back up and very quickly in future years.
We could do away with tariffs if we imposed a border adjustable tax.
Well, by the way, let's talk about tariffs for a second. President Trump, remember at the G7, when he was lectured by his betters, Merkel and Macron on the first day, about this whole thing about tariffs, right? He came back the next day for breakfast, and what Trump told the G7, he said, okay, I thought about it last night. How about this? No tariffs. Absolutely no tariffs, but no subsidies.
Yeah. People
have to realize, like the White House put out this document, I think it's over 2 months ago now, the 50 things that China is doing in its economic war with us. It's kind of what the United States wants China to stop. That's the deal. You stop that, we're all good. When you look at that, it's not just the tariffs. It's the investment in state-owned industries. Yeah. Remember, they have
free land, free electricity,
free land. What they've done. Look at what they've done in steel and aluminum throughout the world. Look what they've done with shipbuilding. You can go every heavy industry. They've gutted. They've gutted the Western Europe and they've gutted the United States, and they continue to do that purposely. And they're also, by the way, ZTE showed you this. They have to create, I think it's some number of 11 million jobs a year. They're under enormous internal economic pressure to create those jobs. They can't afford to have 150,000 high value added jobs at ZTE just go away. Same thing with the steel. They're kind of caught on the wheel now. I mean, they're the first to admit they have to keep adding capacity, right? Because they got to keep these guys working. So I think that that's why the Chinese model and all this happy talk that comes from the West about the Chinese model, when you really look at it, I know you are one of the world's handful of experts that I think it looks at the numbers as they really are and not what people hope they are and not how they're spun by China. Because every number that comes out of China, to me, has to be questioned, verified, trust, but verified. Has to be questioned, verified, and then verified again. You got to get a belt and suspenders. And that's why I think we may be hurtling to another financial crisis driven by this financial model of China that can't stand up on its own.
Right. Well, The good news about that is if we're right about China, we're right about their incredible build, their reckless build of credit, coupled with the fact their economy is slowing down, coupled with the size of their banking system, their GDP. If we're right about all those things, the good news is their banks aren't inextricably linked to ours the way that ours were to Europe and Asia's back during our financial crisis.
They're not, but you used the word they're reckless. And I think that this is what upsets me about the lack of accountability and responsibility by the world's elites. We just went through the worst financial crisis in history. Not one CEO went to jail, and not anybody significantly gave up any equity, okay? What they did is basically inflate, people got to remember, on September 18th of 2008, when Bernanke and Paulson walked into the Oval Office with Bush, and he sent them up to Capitol Hill, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve was $880 billion. On the day that Donald Trump took the oath of office, on January 20th of 2017, it was $4.5 trillion. Yep. All we did in the Bank of England, ECB, Bank of Japan did the same thing.
And the PBOC.
PBOC. What they did is to save the elites, was to turn on the spigots of liquidity. So if you owned assets, if you owned real estate, you owned stocks, you owned intellectual property, you've had the greatest 10-year run in history. If you're a working class schmendrick, your wages are flat. The whole burden of it, this is what's unfair, and this is where the anger that's driving the populist movement. The whole burden comes down on the little guy to finance these deficits with his taxes.
That's right.
And then his kids get sent everywhere in the world to defend this. That's what's got to stop. You use the word reckless. It is reckless disregard of what the elites have done this time. Because all they've done, Chinese banks, look, the American banking system has $19 trillion of assets on it.
Correct.
And I would respectfully submit, and you're 10 times smarter than me on this, I would respectfully submit that all of those assets are not good, okay? Maybe, let's say 10% or more could be written off today. That's the American banking system. The Chinese banking system, I think, has $49 trillion of assets.
That's right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think 45 trillion have been put on the books since 2008. This is completely reckless. Now, thank God they're not interconnected through the SWIFT system with the rest of the banks.
Or through derivatives.
Derivatives.
Yeah.
And by the way, the reason is, and this is another tell, because none of the investment banks or none of the guys want to say, whoa, we can't hook up with China, right? Because they all stopped themselves from doing it. They all limited their exposure to it because they understand when it implodes, they don't want to be taken down in the first couple of minutes. That being said, those banks are going to implode. Nobody can put those kind of assets on, okay, and have a great banking system.
Yeah.
This is a total and complete sham. And in The Economist, in the Financial Times of London, all the elites, all the conferences they have. You had Richard Haas on this morning on Morning Joe. Richard Haas from the Council of Foreign Relations. And all he's doing is beating up Mike Pence and Donald Trump from Pence's speech last night. You know what he's saying? He's saying, hey, all my Chinese colleagues, all my buddies in China, they're telling me they don't know what the United States wants. They came over here, they want a deal and they want to be our partner, but we keep moving the goalposts. That is reckless for him to say that.
Yeah.
He fully understands what the issues are, okay? And he sits there on a general news show in the morning that, basic voters watch and starts putting this stuff into their mind is unacceptable. I got to tell you, Kyle, that's what I think what you're doing here, what you're doing with your work and other things. There are a number of people like yourself that are sitting there going, this can't continue. And people are going to be held accountable for this. If the elites think they're going to skip on this one, it's not going to happen. The reason Donald Trump's president, the reason you're seeing these populist revolts, whether it's in Italy, Germany, France, throughout the world, in Brazil this weekend, okay, in Argentina, in Pakistan, is the reason is the little guy is fed up with a group of elites that know better, right? And to take care of themselves, they will play ball with anybody.